My name is Rayanne Silva, and I work for the University of Washington SMART Center. For those of you who aren't sure what SMART means, SMART stands for the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center. We're also the home of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, who's the host of tonight's event. The Northwest MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, and at the request of our funder, I'm going to share that the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So before we go any further, let's do our land acknowledgement. So the University of Washington SMART Center and Northwest MHTTC acknowledges that we learn, live, and work on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people who walked here before us and those who still walk here. We are grateful to respectfully live and work as guests on these lands with the Coast Salish and Native people who call this home. We encourage you to learn about the ancestral lands that you are joining us from. And in the chat, we've dropped a link that allows you to identify the stewards of your land. So as I shared earlier, the MHTTC network is funded by SAMHSA, which stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. The MHTTC network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaskan Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. So our center, the Northwest MHTTC, serves Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And we know that today's audience includes participation from across all regions, but we wanted to make sure that you're aware of your local region and encourage you to check out their website as well as our website. Right, before I turn it over to Matt and Kristen, I wanted to quickly remind everyone that if you missed session 1, all the materials have been saved on our website. I will drop the link in the chat so that you can access them after the session today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends from Youth Move National.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. I'm the Youth Program Director at Youth Move National. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, so actually your neighbor. And, you know, before joining Youth Move National, I worked with the Department of Corrections, Juvenile Services on implementing trauma-informed system of care. And before that, I was a youth coordinator at Youth Move Maine, actually in the other Portland. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt to introduce himself.
Everyone, welcome to the session. Excited to be sharing the space with you all. My name is Matt Levitt. I am the communications coordinator here at Youth Move National. I use he, him pronouns, and I am located just outside of Portland, Maine, so on the other side. Kristen and I go way back to our time at Youth Move Maine. But I got my start in sort of youth work, working for the Upward Bound program for about a decade, and working with young people who are looking to get a college education, but coming from low income backgrounds, and working with them, and then got my master's in higher education, and then started working at Youth Move Maine, and then eventually consulting for Youth Move National, and now doing communications. So I do a lot of marketing, branding, social marketing, kind of TA, but I have a lot of background in youth engagement as well. So very excited to be here and share some of our expertise with you all today. So a little bit more about Youth Move National. I dropped the link in in the chat box, so you can check that out as well for a little bit more, but it's www.youthmovenational.org. And all of the work that we do, a lot of the work that we do is technical assistance with organizations, with communities. A lot of the folks that are on the call today and that were on the call last time, we work with school professionals, counselors, we work with youth organizations, a lot of social work and education fields. I see a lot of people from like corrections, like Kristen said, she has a background in that. So we really span a whole systems perspective, and a lot of that's focused around mental health. But as we know, with cross-system involvement, we work with foster care, we work with corrections, we work with a lot of different systems to really focus on raising and elevating youth voice in those systems so that they are active participants. A lot of our first session focused on some of the principles of being youth guided, youth driven. So everything that we do, we try to inject that into programs as a way to both involve and engage youth, but really make sure that they're active participants in whatever system involvement that they have. So really raising awareness around those issues, whether it is mental health, stigma, it could be something like bullying. We have a peer support center as well. So a huge chunk of our work is working with programs to implement to better their peer support programs. So they are youth guided, youth focused, and we can share more information about that. A big center of all of that is really making sure that youth rights are activated and center in all of the work that we do, and that the systems that serve them are there for their best interests. And then really just being equal partners with young people, that we're in it together and that we're not there to just tell youth what they should be doing. Anything else that you want to add to that, Kristen? All right.
So we had this slide up a couple of weeks ago, but in case there's folks that were not were not able to join the first session or haven't listened to the recording, this is the foundation of everything that we're going to be talking about today, which is this concept of youth guided, which means young people have the right to be empowered, educated, and given a decision-making role in the care of their own lives, as well as the policies and procedures for all youth in the community, state, and nation. This was a definition that young people actually created through a series of focus groups many, many years ago, and we have continued to use this definition at Youth Move National. But really, at the heart of it, making that young people are driving and engaging as equal partners in systems change work.
So today's objectives, some things that we want to go through with you. The last session was really the foundations and the basic principles. So it would be really great if you weren't part of that session to go and listen to that. A lot of today's session is going to focus on examples and what that looks like in practice. And we're really going to go through some specific projects and programs and look at different domains of youth engagement that those are activated through. So you certainly don't have to have known that, because these examples we're going to talk through, like the benefits of those from a youth engagement perspective. So we're going to review strategies within those programs and projects about how to maximize youth leadership and really utilize young people's strengths to involve them in those projects. Understanding how to assess the youth engagement efforts. A lot of the barriers that come with youth engagement is really just like people aren't showing up. So coming up with some of those strategies and those efforts to better engage young people. Identifying the challenges that go along with engaging young people and discuss some of those solutions for engaging them. And then also, as I said, describe some real world examples. So a big chunk of the presentation is really going to be looking at what are some projects, and we know that not all projects can be implemented in the same way. So we're going to use them, but then also talk about ways that you can flex those projects or think about them in different ways or take pieces from them to maybe incorporate into your own programs based off of maybe what your funding is or maybe what your availability or capacity is. So some of the strategies for effective youth engagement, last time, one of the poll questions that we asked everybody were, what are some of the barriers that you see when you're trying to engage young people? And so I just wanted to take a second to kind of put a spotlight on what some of the reactions were from all of the participants from last time. Some of the things that were talked about were access. So that can mean a variety of things. and kind of associated with that logistics. So when we think about like the time that people are meeting, the location, transportation, especially right now in the last couple of years with COVID, the inability to meet. So sometimes transportation's been an issue, but technology has been sort of the shift of framing of whether or not we have access to technology to actually do meetings with young people or programs. Because sometimes meeting over a phone or whatever, but if you have a drop-in center or something like that, sometimes that can be even more difficult to approach. Personal trauma, having the ability to like go into a group, knowing that we all have our own stories and come into space. And sometimes that's difficult for people. So being able to provide support in that way. Funding, sometimes you might not have, I know that one of the issues that we had a lot was whether or not you could, provide food with certain dollars if young people were coming, but you really needed to provide food because maybe the session was around dinner time or it was on a weekend, or maybe it was a lot of, homeless youth coming to the programs. Family issues or parental cooperation and the ability, some young people have to take care of siblings or work or do other things. The appeal, is it fun? Is it engaging? Is it just like, come to our focus group because we want your opinion? Are there other ways to frame those things so that they're actually interesting to young people to come to those? Stigma, so if you're part of a specific kind of group, or maybe there's personal stigma about engaging in mental health activities or system activities or feedback in those places. So those were just a couple. We got a lot of great feedback about it, but I just, before talking about strategies, wanted to frame it around and kind of honor that we know that a lot of these things, a lot of other things are barriers for engaging young people. So if you want to talk about that more, we can too, because we know that that's a, the strategies can only be effective if young people are showing up, and that you can actually break down some of those barriers. So some of the strategies for combating some of those things, and then other barriers, providing incentives. So sometimes this might be when you're writing grants, really writing in there that you need to provide stipends to young people for their time and their feedback and their experience. Whether that's in the school or community service, it could be volunteer credit if it's in a school environment. It could be just like I was saying, like the food showing up. It could be providing, like what's the reason that they're coming? Is it just to give feedback? What are they getting out of it? Because even as adults, when we go to something, we want to know like what's in it for me, and that's just basic human nature. So. But another incentive could also be the education, training, and ongoing support that they're receiving. And that applies to both young people and any partners that you might be involving in the process. Sometimes you might not have the funding or the meeting space or whatever, but if you're partnering with somebody else, it might be good for both of your organizations to partner on a program and sort of share those resources. So that goes along with partnering with existing youth organizations, being flexible. If you have 4 young people that are consistently showing up and all those 4 young people are saying, hey, next Thursday we can't do it, finding a different time to meet, or can we, maybe people don't like Zoom, so you want to use like Google Hangouts or Discord or something else. Like just really getting that feedback and knowing what's going to work for young people is really important. Providing logistical support kind of goes along with incentives, but there might be specific things like childcare, transportation, or access that potentially you can provide to them. Sometimes there are state programs with technology. I know that at least early in the pandemic, certain internet companies were giving internet access for free to those who didn't have access to it. So being sort of creative with the ability to provide logistical support. Other leadership opportunities that are happening in the community, and that might go along with partnering and saying, hey, I know there's this other opportunity, especially if you're at capacity with staff or funding, there might be other ways that you can share leadership opportunities. Using a shared decision-making framework. So what Kristen was saying, if things are youth guided and youth feel like their voice is heard, they're going to be more apt to be involved and actually be invested in the program that you're running. And then go where the youth are. I know we're going to talk about a project in a little while that some of the struggles that Kristen and I had getting youth to come to our groups when we were youth coordinators. We were just like, one or two young people are showing up. And so there's this investment in time and resources, and it can be really disheartening to show up. And although even, connecting with one youth is like a success, you're putting programs and money and time into these things to make a community impact. So what are ways that you can maximize that? So sometimes you have to knock on doors and maybe host your event somewhere else rather than your own space because you don't have that connection yet. And then lastly, using youth voice for change. So doing things like anti-stigma campaigns, things that young people care about, whether it is cyberbullying or a virtual campaign in that sense, like really focusing on youth issues and getting a sense of what those are from young people.
Okay, so I just wanted to add one thing about the going where youth are, and then like the last piece, but virtually also go where youth are. I've been talking to lots of folks, like I'm now considered what Gen Z is calling like an elder millennial. And, I use Instagram and Twitter, but like a lot of Gen Z is actually using TikTok. My daughter's 11 and her and her friends have like a group chat on Discord. And so really finding where young people are already hanging out is really helpful. And then the concrete and tangible, creating like a report or something that sits on a shelf isn't going to be particularly meaningful for young people. They want to see like actual change. And that might be as small as like helping to create a survey or helping to, seeing like a program change or policy change because they made recommendations, but, really needing to see some sort of tangible result from the efforts that they're putting in. And now I'm going to talk about the Youth Voice agency level assessment. As Matt indicated at the beginning, that we are going to talk about the importance of evaluating youth voice and kind of assessing where you're at. We created this tool in partnership with Portland State University. We collaborated with the Pathways Research and Training Center to develop the assessment of youth and young adult voice at the agency level, which we lovingly call the YVAL. The YVAL is a validated tool that measures the extent to which agencies and other organizations support youth and young adult voice and meaningful participation in advising and decision-making at the agency level. The assessment was developed with input from youth and young adult leaders, so particularly from our Youth Best Practice Committee. They helped create the questions, they helped us review and modify the tool. They told us when language wasn't right or told us if it was too long or something was unclear. So it was really important for us to have that youth voice driving that process. And we also partnered with representatives of other agencies that are working to promote meaningful youth voice. The YVAL really provides a framework of key indicators of meaningful and successful youth and young adult voice in program design at the agency level. We've talked about the value of youth voice during the last session and sort of the benefits of authentic youth engagement. And assessing really allows for a collective and reflective process for better understanding where your agency or organization is at when it comes to youth voice. It can really give you sort of that baseline so that you can kind of constantly work to improve and evolve when it comes to youth voice. Like I really do see it as a quality improvement tool in many ways, because you can, retake the assessment a year or 2 years down the road and really see if your efforts have made a difference. And so this assessment really, again, allows organizations to really promote a shared vision for success, identify strengths and needs when it comes to youth engagement, and really supports agencies with moving towards identifying ways to have sustainable youth engagement. One thing that is important about this tool is that it does require that young people at the agency participate, so that and it really helps young people to advocate for meaningful participation and support. It has 8 domains that examine sort of critical themes and what we would consider best practices of a youth-driven approach at the agency level. So these were the following themes that were identified as requirements for achieving youth-driven practice at the agency level. Overall vision and commitment. So our overall policies and procedures in place that support meaningful youth engagement. A collaborative approach, are young people being treated as valued partners in the decision-making process? Are you truly partnering with them? We talked a bit about Hart's Ladder participation. And so are you actual partners or are they being tokenized? So really reflecting on that collaborative approach. Empowered representatives. So are young people supported in a way that will maximize their potential? So going back to the strategy slides, are they getting the training, education, mentorship that's really going to allow them to successfully engage in whatever it is that you're doing together? Commitment to facilitation and support of youth participation. So is the organization investing resources to support youth voice? Is the, as Matt said, when you're writing a grant, are you incorporating the cost or FTE that's going to have to go towards youth engagement? Writing in things like stipends, or sometimes SAMHSA doesn't like that word. So if, maybe it's an honorarium, but really, are you allocating the time, the money that's really going to allow you to successfully engage? So workforce development and readiness and to ensure meaningful participation. Again, we talked about that on the strategy slide, our staff being trained to collaboratively work with youth and young adults. The training needs to go both ways. Young people need to have the training and mentorship to learn how to collaborate with adults and also just understand whatever it is you're working on. But adults need to also be trained in youth culture or, some of the ways in which they need to change their behaviors to support youth voice. Participation in developing programming and program policies. So is there evidence that young people are having an impact on how programs and services work? Are they being involved in making program and policy changes? Or participation in evaluation and ensuring program quality. So are young people being engaged in how well the agency is doing its work? Are you inviting young people to, again, develop surveys or protocols? Are you supporting young people in reviewing data or having them help you make meaning of data that you're receiving? And then finally, leading initiatives and projects. So does the agency support youth and young adults to take the lead on projects they design? So this assessment, again, is intended to be relevant to a variety of agencies that serve youth and young adults and offers an opportunity to reflect on your current practices and opportunities for improvement. To learn more about the tool, you can reference the resources slide, which I think includes a hyperlink to Youth Move National's page. This tool was developed with federal dollars, so it is free to access and to use. And then we also, as a side note, created another tool with PSU called the YVOC, which is Youth Voice on Councils. So the YVOC really looks at like agency-wide practices. If you have like a youth advisory council or another type of advisory council that has youth sitting on it, the YVOC, and you want to see if you're doing that work well, the YVOC would maybe be a more appropriate tool because it really looks specifically at including youth voice and governance structures.
All right, so now we really want to kind of dig into centering a few examples around these themes and looking at some programs and projects that encompass different aspects of this. And sort of like the last time we talked about Hart's Ladder participation, and that is really a way to gauge where your organization or your programs might be from a youth guided perspective. So this is, and we kind of say like, you don't always have to be everything is 100% youth driven, but you want to be incorporating and trying to move up the ladder so that you're not maybe tokenizing or manipulating or just having a young person there just to check a box on a grant, that things are authentic and the engagement is inclusive. So on the side of each of these slides is going to be based on the Y-val that we just shared and kind of how these projects reflect the mission in there. And then because that is really looking at whether or not agencies are incorporating certain youth guided practices that will help with engagement. So the first one that we want to talk about is the Youth Move Change Initiative. This was a grant that we wrote and that we got from the Upswing Foundation. And really the whole initiative was to support workforce development. So that is kind of a one-on-one with thinking about the theme workforce development. Specifically to look at peer support within BIPOC and LGBTQ plus communities and how the unique needs of both the participants of peer support programs that are within those populations, but then also those offering those services. So a big part of that was this past summer, there was a training that everybody went through that was sort of based off of our peer curriculum from Youth Move National, but then really focusing in on some of those specifics with LGBTQ and BIPOC youth. We hired a director that was a young person of color that oversaw the training program, and then we had Youth Move staff training young people. There was also a fellowship program, so we hired 3 individuals, and again, there was a compensation and a stipend for their participation, and each of them worked, helped with the overall program, but then they also had their individual projects that they worked on. So when we're thinking about maybe like a school setting or something, sometimes, you know, you might not have this grant program, but there might be programs or initiatives where young people can be working on projects. So like one of the fellows created a zine. So basically they conducted a variety of focus groups and got feedback about what trans and non-binary youth needed in their community. They did sort of what we call a what helps, what harms approach to get feedback about within services and systems, within schools, within mental health, what are things that are positive, what are things that help you, and then what are some of the challenges or things that might be harming young people, and specifically within these populations. So a zine was created, a training program was created, and then an executive summary about what the field needs. And then I talked about the Peer Connect training. There was a youth summit that youth came to. I think there was, I don't want to misspeak, but I think there was like maybe 100 participants that came together. And we had some keynote speakers from the community talking. It was hosted over Zoom, and there was a bunch of sessions. There was opportunity for self-care reflections with young people, and it was really a big success. So that kind of goes in. Maybe you can't do a full training program, but maybe there's like a youth summit or an event that you can put together yes, and there was a drag show at the end with some people that had some pretty popular Instagrams. So it was actually a pretty cool event. And then right now, there's been ongoing coaching and support for those who are involved in training, and is also available to everybody in the community. And so there's 9, I think actually 10 now modules from like Ableism 101, BIPOC youth and mental health, Native communities. So we put together these learning modules and videos and discussion boards so that there could be ongoing conversations after this grant program ends that kind of lives on, and so that young people can continue doing this work. So this was kind of a unique program in that we're able to angle a lot of different programs within a larger grant structure, but any individual one of these, you know, it doesn't have to be a fellowship program. It could be, if you're in a school, it could be a peer mentoring program, or if you're in a community, it could be like a peer support program. So there are different ways and events, whether it's, you know, a 6-week event or a 1-day event that you can kind of, depending on your funding and your capacity, could potentially engage in.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So what helps, what harms is a facilitated discussion framework for gathering feedback from youth with systems experience. Youth Move National adopted the What Helps, What Harms framework to really be a policy initiative, which was inspired by one of our chapters, Bravehearts, in New York. In 1993, the Bravehearts youth group came together and identified the needs of their community through this framework. And then they developed a document which was shared with their county commissioner. And in response, the commissioner actually hosted a community conference where the young people were invited to present on each aspect of the document that they created. So it's a very youth-driven framework, and it's an initiative for young adults to, again, spend time in these facilitated conversations, really sort of doing some community mapping and analyzing their community network, analyzing what resources and services and their general environment, what's available to them. And then again, as Matt said, like really looking at, what is helpful, what is harmful. And those discussions are based on three simple questions. What I already said, what is helping us, what is harming us, and finally, what's needed, right? So young people can identify the gaps that they are seeing within their community. And these questions are applied to systems, to service providers, education settings. You can ask, what's really nice about this framework is you can do it in any, it's going to be relevant regardless of what you're doing. It could be program specific, or it could be looking at the entire education system. It could be school specific, or again, like looking at all of juvenile justice, right? But it's a really nice framework. So we were really inspired by what the work that they had done. And so we adopted the What Helps, What Harms framework. And then in 2014, we invited our chapters to lead these conversations with the young people they were working with, to really, again, provide feedback on the systems that serve them. We were able to replicate and really scale up this initiative, and we learned a lot through that process. We learned what young people were prioritizing, and really what themes were emergent about what young people were identifying as what's helpful, what's harmful, and what's needed. Again, this was entirely youth-led. Like, these were youth coordinators from our chapter network, all young people with lived experience who are working with other young youth with lived experience. They were the ones who were, doing the outreach to get young people to participate in these conversations. They were the ones leading the actual conversation. And then they were the ones who were compiling the information and sending it back to us, to then create kind of a broader sort of document and policy agenda based on what they had shared. So again, like looking at those YVAL themes, this is an entirely youth-led process. They really are leading the initiative and project. In fact, they're the ones who inspired Youth Move National to adopt it. I think it really applies to that workforce development piece, because it supports young people in learning the skill of how do you facilitate conversations? How do you write a focus group report? How do you do some data analysis to, code and identify what themes are coming up when you're doing qualitative data collection? And similarly, that participation and evaluation. So in 2020, the National Empowerment Center, which is one of 5 consumer and consumer support, or TA centers, we have one of them. It's called the Peer Center. Matt referenced that earlier. And they reached out to us to partner on adapting their existing eCPR curriculum for a youth audience. So through this process, we identified youth consultants, and they co-led curriculum development, from the review of the existing content to say, this isn't going to work for youth, or these examples aren't relevant to youth, to developing new content when they, again, identified things that needed to be changed. And then finally, by becoming trainers in the model. Youth eCPR is entirely facilitated by youth and young adults with lived experience, from the ages of 16 to 25. And what's really great about this model is it's something that can be implemented, again, across systems. Young people are being trained to assist their peers through an emotional crisis. And unlike models like mental health first aid, youth ECPR isn't necessarily focused on like recognizing symptoms and encouraging someone to go get professional help. It's really more about sitting with someone through crisis, sort of de-escalation. It's not about problem solving or fixing it, but it's really focused on that peer relationship and connection. The original ECPR was developed by Dan Fisher and some other folks at National Empowerment Center, again, designed to be an educational program to really teach people to assist others through an emotional crisis by 3 simple steps, really connecting, empowering, and revitalizing. So this was a really great process. We, again, were able to invite young people into the process to really, again, like lead. They helped write curriculum. They are the facilitators of this training. They're the ones who helped guide really the whole process. And similarly, empowered representatives, we trusted them entirely to help guide us through this process. And they're the ones who are facilitating the training for other youth. And it was designed to really primarily be used in high school settings. So I think it's a great model if you are in an education setting, for young people to have the knowledge of sitting with their peers and really supporting their peers when they're having sort of emotional distress. I think there are, again, like other models that are equally important, youth mental health first aid, really being able to recognize, signs and symptoms of mental health conditions. I think that there's actually NAMI Washington. There's the youth coordinator there, does a suicide prevention training. And now I'm totally blanking the name of it, but it'll come back to me. But so the Maine Youth Court is a program that our chapter, Youth Move Maine, when Matt and I actually were working there at the time, that it was one of the programs of Youth Move Maine. Ending the silence. Thank you, Peggy. It was driving me bonkers. But so the Maine Youth Court is a youth-led restorative justice diversion program for young people who are in trouble with the law and or their school. And at the heart of the program, it's really a belief in youth leadership. So youth are trained as volunteers and serve as advocates and facilitators throughout the restorative process. All the young adults that are youth and young adults that are trained in the restorative justice practices, including restorative and support circles, they're trained by actually young adult staff of the Maine Youth Court. They serve, quite a few youth serve on the Maine Youth Court Advisory Council. So that is, their advisory council is a really great example of young people being in the mix, right? That I think it's like 50% youth who are on the council. And then the other folks, there's representation from the court system. So DAs or judges, there's representatives from school systems. And then there are representatives, from the mental health provider network as well. And they have done a really great job of keeping it to where at least 50% are youth. Something that we often see in advisory councils is, there's like one youth who's expected to be kind of the spokesperson for all youth. And it can be very awkward. I mean, not one young person can be a spokesperson for every lived experience. But the other thing is, like, it can be really awkward to be the only young person in a room full of adults. It can be really intimidating. It can feel really hard to actually authentically participate. And so they've done, again, a great job of having a requirement that at least 50% be young people. I know that Pathways Research and Training Center at PSU, I think they have a similar, I think it's like 51%. Our board of directors, we have a requirement that it is, I think, actually even higher. I think it's like 60% that have to be 29 and under. So really great example of having empowered representatives, and they have a real commitment to and facilitation of support. So they have young adult staff who really are there to guide young people, provide them with training and mentorship, but also, debrief, be able to check in. it's a really cool program. You can go ahead to the next. Oh, actually, and then the one key piece here, this is an example of a program that I think has done a really good job of being able to partner with schools, and Department of Corrections, Juvenile Services, and the court system. And I think what they've done with schools is really great. They have multiple schools who now actually refer youth who are in trouble, instead of, suspensions or other kind of punitive things, they can divert to this program where young people are able to go through this restorative process, and also be connected to other young people, be connected to other resources and supports, and really go through that process.
So the next thing that we have is actually a poll, but I just wanted to chime in with just one more thing about youth court, but then in general, when we think about, especially when you're talking about disciplinary action within like schools and communities, there's a lot of different perspectives that youth come into those with. It might be shame, it might be sort of rebellion. There's like a lot of different components to that. So oftentimes, and what we see as the strength of peer support in a general sense is that it's easier to connect with other youth and share those things sometimes, because there's not going to be that judgment. And I'm sure like we come into this field to be supportive and whatnot, but there's also like perceptive divides between youth and adults. And oftentimes these types of programs and having, especially like Kristen's saying, it being awkward to be the only one person, but then also you feel like there's other people sort of, not that it's about sides, but you feel like there are other people like you coming into a space and able to maybe support your vision so that you're not the only person with that, potentially that perspective. So there's a lot of power in that peer support, but then also just having the peer, like people that are your peers in the same space. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is a little bit of polling. With such a large audience, sometimes it's hard to get interactions. Thank you to people who've asked questions so far. But we wanted to get a little feedback from all of you about, we've shared a couple of programs that we've seen success in different elements and domains. And we have a little bit more to share after this, but we wanted to take a break and from us talking and just hear a little bit from you all. So we have a Menti poll. So it could be something that you helped plan. It could be something that you just, maybe it was another department or something, but just something that you've seen in your experience that you feel was effective, potentially based on some of the things we've talked about or the themes we've talked about, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be success measured in a different way as you see it. And like we said at the beginning, like these are just some examples of programs, and there might be components of them, or maybe like even with youth court, maybe it's just the advisory piece, maybe it's the restorative circle piece, that you can take components of these, because again, everybody's situation is going to be different. It's hard to give a presentation to such a wide audience when there's so many different scenarios. But the hope is that there are different components to these programs that might spark some ideas for you to start having discussions within your own programs. So some examples, sources of strength, youth-driven and adult-guided. All right, writing curriculum, students leading professional learning for principals. Principals got to be the learners and students. I think those are always really effective too, when positions of power that are typically are adult positions, and you can kind of do some role reversal, as an exposure and education for young people, but then also it gives leaders a different perspective of being sort of, not directly, like there are obviously still differences, but a little bit in the shoes of somebody else. Keep off the grass, a youth conceived, designed, developed, and implemented positive community norm campaign. Awesome. Yeah, a lot of anti-stigma campaigns can be really powerful because young people can easily just share their experiences in a way that, might not require there might require support because it can be difficult to share your story, but there might not need to be like a lot of like extra like training with like jargon or those kinds of things that can sometimes be difficult for you to engage. Oregon's wraparound model, youth support, preparation for the community meetings. Yeah, Maine had a wraparound model too that had like that we when we worked at Youth Move, that we would often go in and we would meet with the case manager so that they knew about the peer support program, so that and I mean, that's obviously the wraparound model that everybody's a part of the process. But those models are very empowering as well. Focus groups, open-ended questions and adapting questions based on responses, advisory councils, sources of strength again, that sounds like a good one. So if somebody can drop the link for that, that'd be great. Anchor Community Initiative, we have a youth action board that regularly meets, and we engage some of the youth from that board and our core team. As much as possible, we try to co-design agendas to ensure that there are well thought out feedback loops. And that can be powerful too, that again, like I was saying before, spaces that are typically reserved for only a certain group. I know that I've been in spaces before where, you know, it was all youth driven, all youth guided, but then you weren't, and youth couldn't attend like the board of directors meeting. And that was like, so there were like these weird boundaries. So sometimes like being in those spaces where typically youth aren't invited can be empowering. It can be very, like Kristen's saying, there needs to be a support there because it can be awkward or daunting. So it's really important to make sure that you're providing support for folks. Overnight middle school guys, girls retreats led by male, female high school students as counselors, which is good because you're getting that closer in age participation. Peer-to-peer campaigns, peer mentoring campaigns. Information and Education Committee includes youth successes due to a small group so that the youth feel heard. UW East Youth Hub, youth were engaged in interactive events, bonfires, hikes, watching games. One of my biggest things always when I do these presentations is like, you have to make it fun. Like if it's not, you know, like creativity can kind of wax and wane as far as like social marketing. But once you get youth there has to be some element of, you know, there's always purpose driven, you know, like focus groups might not always be fun, but, you know, do an icebreaker, do some, like a small team building activity, do something, always carve out time for connection, because that is going to yield better results and better feedback from young people. It doesn't mean you always have to have a bonfire or a game night or whatever, but are there ways that you can mix in some of those elements from a small degree? Or if you have an ongoing program, what are ways that you can mix up so it's not always sort of like business as usual kind of a thing? Healthy transitions programs, student teaching teachers about technology. I can bet you that is both interesting and probably really enlightening. It reminds me of the PDF or the meme that's always like the young person who's like at the lower level of the company, and they're like, but the CEO comes to them to like learn how to turn a Word document into a PDF. And so that there is a need for the skills of young people, especially when it comes to technology. In media and those kinds of things, and that those things are valued and appropriately compensated as well. Community mapping, sidekicks, 15th night. Thank you everybody for sharing all those examples. That's really powerful. All right, so we have one more example of a project, and this is something that Kristen and I did sort of at our 11th hour of feeling sort of like, where do we go? We were kind of both new to doing youth coordination in Maine. We were in different parts of the state. We had regional programs, and we were expected to sort of cover the whole state. We had a statewide chapter. So I was in Northern Maine, but Northern Maine is like a 6-hour span. And we had a mid-Maine, we were supposed to cover coastal Maine. So there are all these regions, and we were having a really difficult time finding a way. We did the community mapping, and we were connecting with case managers and trying to get into schools and different places. And we were just having that like 1 or 2 young people show up, maybe, or maybe not consistently, and knowing some of those barriers that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So we kind of went back to the drawing board. I have a background in media. New media is my first degree, and then I did education. So we were thinking about, again, how can we make it fun? So Kristen and I came together and we developed this project called Identity. because a big part of what we were doing at the time was also focus groups, and we were getting feedback from young people about what do you need? What do you need from the community? What kind of things would be helpful as far as programs? Because we want to create programs at Youth Move that reflect what you desire, because we want you to come to the programs and we want it to be beneficial for you. So we were doing those focus groups, and we came up with this project called Identity, which ended up sort of being this multi-level art project that spanned the whole state as far as we were traveling. And it was really a community youth project. And so it was led by the youth coordinators who were in the different regions. And we developed workshops where we went in, and the primary purpose of the program was also to get a sense of the division or the perceptions of adults and young people and how they saw each other. So we did one workshop where we gave everybody disposable cameras. We went to homeless shelters. We went to workforce employment programs. We went to it was like a hospital, but they had like a healthcare program. And so we worked with young people there, a couple of drop-in centers. So we had a real range of programs. And we did that thing where we relied and we leaned on our partners to access young people. And then we went into those spaces and traveled to those spaces. We gave them cameras and we gave them prompts. Take pictures of basically things in your life. What does home look like? What does friendship look like? And some of them were like concrete suggestions, and some of them were more conceptual, like what does love look like for you? What does death look like for you? So all these different things. And then we came back and developed those. And then we did another workshop where everybody wrote a love letter to themselves. So it was sort of like what do you know now that you wish you had known? And then like sort of that activity where you like write a letter to your future self. And so then we compiled all of the pictures and all of the words and the quotes. We were doing the what helps, what harms at the time. So we included data, and we printed a magazine, and we went back and we had a celebration with pizza and everything with the young people, where we gave them back what they did. And we talk a lot about follow-up and how follow-up is really important with young people. And so closing that loop, we had created these relationships with young people over these couple of months and these sessions and these workshops we did, but really like giving them the magazine was really like the really impactful part of this project, because they were seeing that something that they were putting out into there. And a lot of it was talking about how adults see that, especially young people who were like in the homeless programs, really seeing like how they felt the community and adults saw them. So it was just a really powerful product, but then it also was a tool for us to go. We went to the state flag day where representatives and senators were, and we had magazines laid out. We were able to bring them to other partners in the future as a marketing tool to say, this is kind of one of the things that we do. So it was just, and it really kind of rejuvenated our confidence in doing programs, but then also getting feedback from young people, and then also doing something really cool for the community as well. So this past year, for our Children's Mental Health Awareness Campaign, which we do every May, we actually went back and we took all of the workshop modules that we did, and we created a toolkit. So I'll link the toolkit in a second, but basically we went through and gave everybody the step-by-step of each workshop, what it looks like, how you can adapt it if you don't have disposable cameras or the budget, what can you do, how can you kind of adapt those things. And so that was really powerful tool to give to our other chapters as well. And it's available to you all. It's something that you can easily do in schools. It's something you can do in a drop-in center. It's something you can do, again, maybe you're like, I don't have youth in my program. Okay, what are 3 programs in your community that you could say, hey, do you have an hour 3 times a week or once per week 3 times over the next month, and do something like that. So, and it doesn't have to be this, but this was a fun and engaging project that led youth to share their experiences, was able to give them kind of this cool product as well. And again, we know not everybody has the funding to create a magazine, but maybe it's a digital gallery, or maybe it's an art submission project or something. But it's just a way to look at thinking about ways to engage young people, where I think we think about focus groups as we're sitting in a circle and we're asking questions. And in reality, these workshops were a focus group in themselves, because young people were sharing their experiences in a way of thinking about how to improve the community for them. So
yeah, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Matt said. Like, we were, I just want to acknowledge that it can be hard to do youth engagement work. It can be really hard. There's a lot going on. Especially if you're working with youth and young adults of transition age, they have so many other obligations, maybe they don't have access to, regular phone or regular computer. And so it can be hard. And we were very frustrated and just oh my gosh, are we just really bad at our jobs? And so really going back to that earlier slide on strategies of thinking of leaning into partners, going where youth already are. We went and knocked on doors, boots on the ground, found the places where youth already were, and also partnered with organizations that had relationships with young people. So I went to a school-based mental health clinic that had a really robust advisory council and partnered with them. And it was really great because it was an into the school system, which was very hard. And likewise, there was a Tree Street, which was an after-school program. One of the communities I worked in, I worked primarily with refugee and asylum-seeking youth. And so it was also, there was a cultural thing that a learning curve for me of how to make connection in those spaces and how to do it in a way that's culturally responsive and culturally sensitive. And so really reiterating though that this work can be hard. Don't give up. Try different things, and always lean into your community. Oh, cool. And Matt, this is the actual magazine that we created.
So this is the digital version, but this is what the physical looked like. So, and really, we actually had a youth intern at the time too, who put together a lot of the quotes and the layout and things like that, and then we just published it. So it was very youth guided in the sense of the entire process. And really, we didn't edit their words, we didn't edit the pictures. What they shared is what they shared. So we did highlights on the organization. So it was a great way to build community partnerships as well, so that people knew who we are. The Carlton Project was an alternative school within the homeless shelter. And I ended up doing other programs thereafter, just because I had built that relationship with them. They knew who we were, and we were able to kind of work together on some other things. So just, people took pictures of the places that they were part of, which was really cool. We did, these are all the highlights of the organizations. We shared a little bit about the process that we utilized. We did the what helps, what harms, shared some statistics, so that this was it was a project for them, but it was also an advocacy tool in a lot of ways. So, I mean, this was an expansive project, but again, you can take pieces. If you just wanted to take a slice of something like this, then you can do that. So these are the young people that participated. So it was just a really successful program, but it really showed us that you can, using a little bit of creativity can really make something powerful happen. So what can I do? That's we shared a lot of examples, and especially if you're here last time, we kind of built the foundation, and today talked a lot about the components of projects and programs that you can look at. And there sometimes, like we were saying, sometimes you kind of come up to this space and you're it's almost what can I do? Because you kind of might feel defeated, or you might feel like people aren't showing up. So here's just a couple of things that to just consider as you're developing programs or you're making invites to young people to be at the table. Is to really create intentional space for young people to express themselves, whether it is an art project or it is a more traditional focus group. Like, there has to be a platform for young people to do that sharing in an authentic way. And then develop the goals around young people and their self-identified needs. And that's really important. I think we know what a lot of the issues are in our community, but it's from a specific perspective as well. It comes from, maybe it is because we're grant funded, or it's because we're in a school or we're in a specific organization that has specific goals. But if we're going to incorporate youth voice, it's really important to make sure that they're identifying what those needs are as well. Identify a place in the school, organization, community, where they can join the discussion. And like we said earlier, we know right now, especially with COVID, that can be difficult. So it might be creating a TikTok page. I know that one of our chapters at the beginning of the pandemic, they didn't have a super active Instagram account, and it was basically just the one youth coordinator that was working for the program. But once a week, she got on and just shared a message about what was going on in the office, like a little like, we miss meeting with you, kind of a thing. And it was just a way for them to share a little bit about about where they were at, but then also try to connect with young people. So the place might be virtual, but try to find a dedicated space so that, and oftentimes a consistent space will be helpful as well, because that will help young people feel familiar with the program or project. Find a youth-run organization in your community and make a connection. So I feel like we've talked about that a lot. Like, lean on people who are already doing cool things in the community and see if you can join in and say, hey, we're really trying to engage young people about suicide prevention, and we think we have common goals as far as like mental health and suicide prevention. So maybe it's a table at a fair, maybe it's a panel discussion at a conference, maybe it's just coming into a classroom and speaking about it. I know that when I was in college, I got connected to a lot of other organizations and groups on campus, just because sometimes people from groups and organizations come and talk to the class and say, hey, we represent A, B, and C, and like, we're looking to recruit other group members. So sometimes just exposing yourself in that way can be beneficial. And then promote and support youth engagement. Share the value. I think we all come into this work with a lot of like positive intention to make change. And sometimes that's like motivated by our own stories or our own relationships to systems or the field, and just being really, really key to think about how you're promoting and supporting youth to do the work, and that you can share mission and vision, but that a lot of the times that the change that's going to be needed for them in the system is going to be best when it comes from them. So really thinking about that youth-guided, youth-driven kind of focus. All right, so the next thing is we have a couple more Menti polls, and we have 3 different slides and 3 different questions. So the first thing we want to ask everybody are, what are 3 key takeaways from today's conversation? What are 3 things that coming in, looking at these examples, thinking about the YVAL themes, thinking about how to engage youth, thinking about the barriers, what are some things that you want to take away from today's conversation? And then that should start popping up when folks start. All right, the importance of validating the youth voice and letting them guide the process so that they can take ownership of the outcome. Yeah, I think that's really key, is thinking about, we often, I think, as either providers or educators or whatever, we have like a set of goals for our organization or our grant or our program, and thinking about how the outcomes to those goals might shift once youth become involved. what helps, what harms, we're excited to see that. We love the framework of that. We think that it's really gets us some meaningful feedback. So have you be involved in making decisions. And it can seem kind of tough or weird, or thinking about a lot of the times we're planning programs. So, and if youth aren't there yet, how do we incorporate them in a way that's authentic, but we are also creating at least a skeleton for the program or the project to come together, because we have to have something to actually market other than, hey, youth, come to this thing and let's create something. You know, it's okay to still have structures and foundations and expectations, but once youth are there, having them be involved in that decision making. The Identity Magazine, creating spaces to reach youth, social media, and how to engage youth voice. Resources, it's okay to start small with youth outreach. Yes, that's really important, because you know, you want to make sure that you're adapting as you're hearing feedback and you're creating spaces, because if something's not working, you don't want to put a bunch of time and money and capacity into something that actually isn't going to work for youth in the community. Don't give up. Yes, we are hopefully a little example of, you know, trying a couple. It might take a couple misses before you get ahead. The 8 critical themes, awesome. Creating intentional space for youth to express themselves. Gather necessary resources. Having a consistent space. Lean in and utilize pre-existing programs. Take the why bow. We like to hear that. But again, that's something that, you know, right now you can go and do and say, like, where am I at? Get creative, use existing resources, why bow tool. Tools on engaging youth, be patient, and it takes time. Yes, it definitely takes time. So, and know that, like, we've all been there where we're like, man, is what I'm doing like a total miss, or like, am I doing something wrong? Or just keep at it, because like eventually something's gonna come along that's gonna like mash up. And sometimes it takes like one young person seeing it and coming to your group, and then that person knows another group of young people who are interested in that thing. And it's like, it can be a lot of happenstance sometimes, which I know we like to like go into things planning and organizing, but sometimes it is a little bit of like, there's a little bit of faith that's needed in like the process.
Well, and to Matt's point about it's just like that one youth that can create that snowball effect. You know, I think another strategy, and it's not on the slides, but really having a buddy system, right? Like, if a lot of young people do feel nervous or anxiety about going into a new space or a new group. I mean, I feel anxiety when I go to a party with people I don't know, right? And so really encouraging young people to use the buddy system, right? Like, bring a friend, come together, so that you can really sort of reduce some of that initial anxiety that might be happening, or that might be a barrier to why young people aren't showing up. And similarly, if you are in a mixed generational advisory council or governance structure of any sort, you know, again, like, it can't just be one young person. You know, you have to have at least a couple of young people together. And also, if you're able to partner with an existing youth program or youth run organization, it can be really helpful. You know, one of the things that would often happen when I was a youth coordinator is we would go to like the Quality Improvement Council, which was the mental health block grant committee. And it was the world's most boring, like, eye-burning, like, it was the most boring meeting I ever went to as a youth coordinator. And I would bring other young people, and a lot of the times, you know, there was a lot of really jargony language that was happening. And so me being a youth coordinator to be able to advocate and say, hey, y'all, you have to say what an RFP is, you know, you have to really explain what that is. And then being able to debrief with that young person after the meeting. Usually they would say, that was so boring, I never want to go back again. So to Matt's point, try to make it as fun as possible, carve out space, even if it is a working meeting. Really important to have fun.
The next thing you should be able to just advance in the Menti is what's something that's squared or agreed with your thinking. So, what's something that you were kind of like, felt like, yeah, I'm doing that, or like, I'm on the right path, or like that makes sense to me. Like that's how I've been framing this thing. So really just thinking about, what kind of aligned with where you're already at in the presentation. Yeah, incentives. Honestly, sometimes that is really the difference between like getting maybe nobody and maybe even two or three. But again, like we're saying, like I had some real success with like the couple of young people that were consistently coming. And sometimes having two or three people that are consistently coming rather than 5 or 6 people that kind of come in and come out can be stronger for the group identity and kind of creating what you're trying to create. To work with transparent intention, so understanding that everybody's on the same page, making things fun. Thank you. Having a representative number of youth. Yeah, I think we've talked about that extensively and how important that is. Getting youth involved. The concept of nothing about us without us. Yeah, I think like that's a lot of it. And when we think about like grants and things like that, a lot of times like have a youth advisory council. And so it's just something that we know we're supposed to do. But we might either not have enough youth or where we're at in our framework of thinking about how to involve youth. Because youth can physically be there and the concept of nothing about us without us can still go out the window. So it's important to make sure that authenticity is a big part of this. Let the youth lead. They will identify when something isn't working and figure out how to fix it. It's sort of like that when you're waiting for you ask a question and you think like nobody else is going to speak, so I should speak, like give it 5 more seconds, because sometimes that's all that it takes for somebody to kind of like step in and maybe share a little bit, especially for those who might not be as used to coming forward with those kinds of things. Being intentional and having a space to express themselves and encourage on planning roles. Awesome. All right, we have one last question and then I will give the voice back to Kelsey. All right, our last question is, what's something that's still circling in your head? What's something that either you might still have a question about, or something that maybe doesn't make sense, or like something that still seems like maybe it's the barriers like just seems like really insurmountable? What's something that's still kind of like, I'm walking away and like there's still a little bit of like tension, or like maybe I need to check into something a little bit more. What's still kind of circling in your head? How to build buy-in with other adults to undertake this type of work. Yeah, sometimes finding people with common purpose can be difficult, even if we're all in the same like field. I know that sometimes it's been difficult, whether it is maybe the government agency or maybe it is a partner, where even though we think there is this, we should be sharing resources, some systems can be very siloed and it can seem very difficult to partner with other folks. As an educator, still wondering about how to involve the youngest students in the conversations about DEI. Yeah, like we think about, I think from a mental health and kind of social work framework and education framework, we think about like developmental appropriateness and like what tools and resources are available at certain age groups. And sometimes we have a question about like, how do you mix age groups together if you have like a wide span of what like youth means? Addressing challenges of bullying in youth-led spaces, forming connections with schools during COVID. Yes, very difficult. Really connecting with anybody during COVID has been difficult. Other organizations, because some organizations maybe aren't, they're not hosting young people at this time. What are the go-to ways to ensure programs, practices are evidence-based? Yeah, so making sure that like your goals are really authentic to not just showing up and saying, oh, we're going to do this thing, that there's like some foundation behind it. How to make it sustainable, how to make it system-wide and cross systems. That's probably one of the hardest things. Is we're in this to make systems better, but sustainability and then impact can be very difficult. So we can, when we share resources too, we can we'll look at these and maybe share some other resources based off of some of the things circling in your head still, as a way to maybe guide you in some other directions. So that's all that we have. Thank you for being in the space and listening to Kristen and I talk about these projects. This is something that we're very passionate about. So feel free to reach back out to Youth Move National if you have other questions, or we do TA. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter. So always feel free to reach out if things are still circling in your head, or you want more resources.
Wonderful. Thank you to Matt and Kristen. We want to extend an invitation to you for some upcoming events that we have. We've just released our UW Smart Center speaker series event that will run through the spring. Our first session is with Dr. Kimberly Arnold on strategies for advancing mental health equity in schools. You can find these sessions by going to our main page, our website, and something that we're doing network wide, following up on some work that we did a couple summers ago. It'll have some information about our communities, healing school communities, and a community of practice that we're doing. Starts tomorrow. So you can sign up for all seven sessions. Each are about 90 minutes. So we have some excellent speakers, and really excited about this opportunity that we're doing with our other school mental health centers from across the network. And just a thank you for those of you who joined us late on a Monday afternoon in the evening. If you're on the East Coast like Matt is, thank you, Matt, for spending your evening with us. Please feel free to reach out at any time if we can support your school mental health efforts or connect you with someone in your region who can. So, and we welcome you to reach out to us, to reach out to Matt and Kristen, and hope you have a good rest of your evening.